No sense denying it. I am who you say I am. I'm the man who sentenced Jesus of Nazareth. Some say the King of the Jews. I say the King of the Jews. To die. To be crucified. Horrible death. We Romans had become pretty good at horrible deaths. I was a Roman prefect, governor of Judea, the fifth one, in fact. And I was there to make a name for myself. To take this assignment of Judea wasn't a really noteworthy assignment. But if I did it right, if I played my cards right, I could turn this little podunk town around, get some good tax revenue out of it, and move my way up the chain in Rome. I figured a few years ought to do it. Well, I was there a few years. You see, when I came into town, my two goals was to let them know who was in charge. That was us. And to build relationships with the higher-ups that would allow for us to use their own power against them to generate taxes and revenue and just obedience in general. I didn't go about it the right way at first. I should have done a little more studying. You see, when I first came into Judea, I came in with all my horses, all my chariots, my flags flying high, the Roman seals, the crests, everything that could identify me as the full power of Rome. Problem was, these Jews had a law against that. You couldn't have any kind of graven image, any image of any kind, set up or flying in their sacred places. So without even knowing it, I laid a strike at the root of their core beliefs from the moment I walked into town. I had some ground to make up. And I began with that right away. I began trying to make peace with the religious elite. I began trying to understand their customs and give them some of the things they were asking for so that later on I could ask things of them. And I was making headway with the chief priests, with their scribes, with the group called the Pharisees. We were beginning to know each other. They were beginning to trust me. I was beginning to gain at least some semblance of their obedience. Until Jesus came along. Now, Jesus just came out of nowhere. Itinerant preacher, preaching kindness and forgiveness and love. You see, the religious elite in there, they had a following because people felt like if they didn't follow, they'd get in trouble. Jesus had a following because people wanted to follow him. Because he spoke like somebody with authority. He spoke like somebody who they had never heard before. You could just kind of sense that there was something otherworldly about the guy. His crowds grew. I started hearing about him. Every time you start hearing about a crowd start to grow, especially in a town like Judea, especially in a situation like mine where they didn't give me a whole lot of soldiers and troops to defend should there be some kind of uprising. You hear about it. I had heard about Jesus. I was keeping an eye on Jesus. In fact, I was beginning to wonder if maybe Jesus ought not to be the one I was befriending. His loyal followers were loyal because they believed in him. The Pharisees, the chief priests, the scribes, their loyal followers were loyal because they were afraid of punishment and retribution and getting kicked out of the synagogue. Well, by nature, Jesus became the enemy of the Pharisees and the chief priests. And I didn't know which side to take. Well, I didn't have much time to think about it. They brought him to me. It was a Friday morning. They had kept him all Thursday night at the high priest's place, accusing him every which way of blasphemy and causing an uprising. By the time he got to me on Friday morning, he was tired. You could tell he'd been worn out. I was excited to finally meet the guy. I had heard about the miracles. I'd heard about people getting healed. I didn't see why they had so much against him. They brought him against me, saying that he had been causing an uprising, stirring up the people against Rome. They said they wanted him to die, but that they couldn't crucify him. It was against their religious rules, especially during their high and holy feast they were having. And they wanted him dead quick. So they said I had to do it. Well, I was still trying to make my decision. Which side am I on? So I brought Jesus to myself and I said, Jesus, are you the king of the Jews? And he smiled. That man never answered a question straight in his life. He smiled and he looked at me and he said, you say that I am. I respected him. All the accusations being brought against him, everything hurled in his direction, people getting all worked up all around him, and he stayed calm, but said nothing. I even asked him about it. You have nothing to say to all these accusations? Again, he just smiled. Well, the Jews, the chief priests, they were getting worked up, and they finally said, this man's been causing an uprising everywhere from Galilee all the way to here. Galilee? Hey, that's not my jurisdiction. That's Herod's jurisdiction. And Herod is one of those who I had upset on my way in. He was supposedly the king. Maybe I'd send Jesus back to him. Show a little deferment to his power, to his authority. Maybe I could make some peace with Herod by sending Jesus back to him. So I said, well, y'all going to have to take Jesus over to Herod. Herod's going to have to make this decision for you. I thought I had figured it out. I had pacified both sides. Well, Herod kept them for a bit. Herod tried to get him to do some tricks, some miracles. Jesus didn't comply. Herod really didn't find anything wrong with the guy either. But it worked. Herod became my friend from that point forward. He sent Jesus back to me and said, if we're going to do something with this guy, it's going to have to be you do it. Well, in the meantime, while they were gone, my wife had come to me. And my wife is much more religious than I am. She said she'd been having dreams about this Jesus. She said she had suffered a lot in a dream as a result of him. She said, don't have anything to do with this. That made it even worse for me. They brought him back. He was dead tired. He was exhausted. He had been beaten. He had been mocked and abused. I asked him again, what do you have to say to these charges? He didn't say anything. I said, don't you know that I've got the power to have you executed or to have you freed? And he looked at me with the most serious look in his eye, and he said, "You would have no power if it weren't given to you from heaven above." And I knew he was right. There was something about the authority with which he said it that I knew that in that place, in my court, he had the authority and not me. And I was looking for a way to get him released. I wanted to release him. I told the Jews, "I find no fault in this man." They said, "We want him crucified. He's blasphemed our God." They used it against me. They knew I was trying to work my way back into their good graces, and this was going to be the only way that I could get back into their good graces. I tried every tactic I could think of. I said, "It's your custom during your feast to release one of your prisoners who's been held as a criminal against Rome. Let me release this guy to show my honoring of your custom." They said, "No. Release Barabbas." Now, Barabbas was a murderer. He had started an insurrection against Rome. He robber too. He's just a bad fella. There was something with what my wife had said, with the depth of what this Jesus had said to me, with the innocence that he portrayed and the truth that seemed to come out of him. I didn't want to be any part of that. I knew what I had to do, though. And so I said, "All right. I'll punish him, and I'll release him to be crucified. But his blood's not going to be on me." That was when the Jews said, "His blood will be on us and our children." They were a bloodthirsty mob. When Jesus got done with the flogging and was led out to be crucified, I had locked myself away. I didn't want any part of it. I didn't want to see it. And it wasn't long before somebody said to me, "What do we do with this dead guy on the cross?" I couldn't believe he was already dead. One of his followers had come to me and asked for his body, so I gave it to him. And then the chief priests come back. I thought I had been done with them, but now they wanted his tomb sealed up and locked up because they were afraid his disciples were going to steal the body. I said, "Fine, take a guard, do it. Do whatever you have to do. Make it secure. Leave me alone. I didn't want this in the first place." My wife had suffered much in a dream because of this man. And I've suffered much because of what I've done. My governorship didn't last much longer. My way of life didn't last much longer. My desire to live didn't last much longer. I had gone against my conscience and against my will to conform to an angry mob for power, prestige. Man, I never thought I'd do that. So here's what I have to say to you. You who believe in Jesus, you who believe that Jesus is who he said he was, that he is the Son of God. If you believe it, stand for it. And take it from me, when Jesus stands right in front of you, he's not always going to be speaking loud. And sometimes he doesn't say much anything at all. But you stand with him. You stay with him. You don't bat an eye, and you don't listen to all the ruckus that's going on everywhere else. You actively follow Jesus. You actively stand up for Jesus. And you don't do what I did. You don't passively ignore the truth. What is truth? Jesus is truth.